Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into something sweet, sugar.
That's right. We're exploring its science, its pretty surprising history.
Yeah, we've got a ton of information here. We're looking at its journey, really, from ancient roots right up to, well, our kitchen cupboards.
Exactly. We're covering the chemistry, how it's made, all the different kinds, how much we eat, and the health side, too.
We've sifted through a lot of material, haven't we?
We certainly have.
Yeah.
The idea is to pull out the most interesting, the most crucial bits for you.
Kind of a shortcut so you get the essentials without drowning in, technical jargon.
Precisely. A clear, engaging look at sugar's many sides.
Okay, so where should we start? Maybe the word itself. Sugar, it sounds like that alone has a story.
Oh, it absolutely does. It's a fantastic linguistic trail. It starts way back in Sanskrit.
Sanskrit. Wow.
Yeah, the word was sharkara. It meant something like grit, gravel, but also granulated or candied sugar.
Okay.
From there it traveled. To Persian it became shakar.
Shakar. Okay.
Then into Arabic as shukar.
Sukar. You can start to hear it now, can't you?
Definitely. And from the Arab world, it eventually made its way into Europe.
Through Latin, I assume.
Exactly. Medieval Latin had sucarum. Then you get the French sucre in the 12th century.
Right. Yeah.
And finally it lands in English as sugar. It's like the word followed the trade routes.
That's fascinating. And what about jaggery, that less refined sugar common in, say, South Asia?
Similar path, actually. Also traces back to that Sanskrit shakara. It came through Malayalam, then Portuguese jagara, and into English.
So sugar's been around for a very long time then. Where did it all begin production-wise?
The Indian subcontinent.
Yeah.
For thousands of years, that's where sugar production was happening.
Thousands.
Yeah. And from India, sugarcane cultivations spread gradually towards China, probably through routes like the Khyber Pass.
But it wasn't like today, right? It wasn't just readily available everywhere back then.
Oh, definitely not. That's key. In ancient times, sugar was, well, scarce, often pretty expensive.
So honey was the main thing.
Honey was much, much more common as a sweetener. For sugar itself, the earliest way people consumed it was, well, pretty basic.
Just chewing the cane.
Exactly. Chewing raw sugarcane stalks to get that sweet juice.
And even when refined sugar became a bit more known, preferences differed.
They did. In Southeast Asia, for instance, places like Java, palm sugar was really the preferred sweetener.
Ah, right. Palm sugar, coconut sugar?
Yeah, they held their own and still do in many local desserts, even after refined sugar arrived on the scene.
So the sugarcane plant itself, it comes from specific tropical regions.
Yes, native to tropical South and Southeast Asia. And interestingly, different species seem to have originated in different spots.
Oh.
Saccharum barberi, one type, is traced to India. But S. edule and S. officinarum, perhaps the more famous ones, they originated in New Guinea.
And we have actual written records mentioning this early on.
We do. Some of the earliest are Chinese manuscripts from the 8th century BCE.
Wow, 8th century BCE.
And they explicitly say sugarcane use came from India.
I remember reading it even pops up in ancient Indian medicine.
Correct, Ayurveda. Sugarcane is ikthe. It's juice veda. Old texts describe different types and their uses.
Okay, but then came the big leap, right? The thing that really changed sugar's destiny.
You mean crystallization?
Exactly. That must have been huge.
It was absolutely revolutionary. Around 350 AD in India, they figured out how to crystallize the juice.
And that meant?
It meant it could be stored, transported. It wouldn't spoil nearly as easily.
Ah.
Suddenly, it wasn't just local. It became this sweet spice that could be traded far and wide.
And people in, like, the Roman Empire encountered this.
They did. We have accounts. Pedanes Dioscorides, a Greek physician in the 1st century CE.
Right.
He described sachron from Indian reeds, said it looked like salt, kind of brittle.
And Pliny the Elder, too, the Roman writer.
Yes, Pliny also wrote about it. Mentioned production in Arabia, but said the Indian kind was better. Described it as white, gum-like, crystalline.
But mostly for medicine, he thought.
Primarily for medicine, yes. Not quite the culinary staple yet. Hazelnut-sized lumps, apparently.
And you know that Indian term for the crystals, khanda, that's where candy comes from.
It is a direct link. Amazing, isn't it?
It really is.
And it was likely Indian sailors, maybe carrying these crystals as supplies, who helped spread the knowledge along trade routes. Buddhist monks traveling were also important, introducing crystallization methods to China.
So China got interested in this new tech.
Very interested.
Yeah.
There's a story about Emperor Taizong in the Tang dynasty expressing interest.
Okay.
And Indian envoys then taught them sugarcane cultivation techniques. This was in the 7th century CE.
So China starts its own plantations then.
They did, and Chinese records even mentioned sending missions to India around 647 CE, specifically to learn sugar refining. They wanted the know-how.
So it's spreading west from India, east into China. How does it properly arrive in Europe?
Well, Alexander the Great's admiral near Tres knew about it way back around 325 BC from his time in India.
But it didn't really catch on then.
Not really. Not widely. It took the Crusaders much later.
Ah, the Crusades.
Yeah, returning Crusaders brought back stories and probably samples of this sweet salt they'd encountered.
And then Venice gets involved, the big trading power.
Exactly. Early 12th century, Venice starts acquiring estates near Tyre in the Levant
To produce sugar.
to produce sugar specifically for export back to Europe. This is where sugar really starts to supplement honey, which had been, pretty much the only sweetener available.
And Venice must have made a fortune.
Immense wealth, and it positioned them right at the center of European food trends, influencing pastries, desserts, things we still recognize.
It's telling that William of Tyre, a chronicler back then, called sugar very necessary. Late 12th century.
It shows how quickly it gained importance, doesn't it?
Mm.
By the 15th century, Venice was absolutely the main hub for refining and distributing sugar in Europe.
But then a shift happens mid-century, something about islands.
Yes, a massive shift. Sugarcane cultivation is introduced to Madeira and the Canary Islands, controlled by the Portuguese and Spanish.
And that changed the game.
Completely. It led to what some historians call an all-consuming passion for sugar in Europe. It was still pricey, a luxury.
But more available.
Much more available than before.
Yeah.
Production ramped up. By 1492, Madeira alone was pumping out over 1.4 million kilos a year.
Wow. And different cities became known for sugar-based things.
Absolutely. Genoa got famous for candied fruits. Venice doubled down on pastries, sweets, and these incredible sugar sculptures.
Sugar sculptures, you mean like art made of sugar?
Exactly. The first record is from a feast in Tours, France, 1457. They had a whole menagerie of heraldic animals, all sculpted from sugar.
Were they meant to be eaten?
Initially, maybe, but they evolved into purely decorative centerpieces called trionfi. Huge, elaborate things.
How did they make them?
Early on, they used brown sugar, pressed into molds. Later, it became more about carving the sugar.
And this lasted for centuries.
Amazingly, yes. Right up until at least 1903, for the coronation of Edward VII in Britain, guests apparently even got little sugar crowns.
Incredible. Okay, so from Europe and these islands, the next big step is across the Atlantic. Right.
The New World. Christopher Columbus, 1492. He took sugarcane cuttings with him.
And it took root.
It certainly did. First harvest in Hispaniola was 1501. By the 1520s, Cuba and Jamaica already had numerous sugar mills springing up.
And Brazil became huge for sugar, too.
Yes, the Portuguese introduced it there. Brazil quickly became a powerhouse producer. By 1600, it had overtaken São Tomé, which was the main center before that.
But even with all this New World production, it was still a luxury in Europe itself for a while.
It was, yes, really until the early 19th century. What changed things then was beet sugar.
Ah, right. Not from cane at all. Where did that idea come from?
German science, actually. In 1747, Andreas Marggraf figured out that beets contain sugar, the same sugar as in cane,
Okay.
and he worked out a way to extract it using alcohol. Then his student, Franz Achard,
Took it further.
he developed an economical industrial method for getting pure sugar from beets, late 18th century.
And this led to actual factories.
First one was in 1801 in Silesia, which was part of Prussia then, Cunern.
So Marggraf and Achard, they basically founded the modern sugar industry.
You could say that. Their work was crucial. It meant sugar wasn't just a tropical luxury anymore. It could be produced in temperate climates.
Which made it cheaper, more accessible.
Exactly. By the 19th century, sugar was everywhere. No longer a luxury, found in pretty much every household.
And that huge demand must have had massive consequences.
Profound economic and social changes. It was a major driver for colonizing tropical lands, specifically for sugarcane plantations.
The numbers on consumption are just wild.
Aren't they? World consumption went up over 100 times between 1850 and 2000. Britain led the charge initially.
And the labor. That's a dark part of the story.
A very dark part. To meet the labor demand, especially in the Caribbean after slavery was abolished, millions of indentured laborers were brought over, mainly from the Indian subcontinent.
So the demand for sugar literally changed the ethnic map of the world.
Absolutely. The forced movement of enslaved people and then the recruitment of indentured workers. It fundamentally shaped the populations of so many nations in the Americas, Africa, Asia. It's a huge legacy.
It's also interesting that sugar production spurred early industry in some places, like India.
Yes, in Bihar, for example, back in the 1790s. And during the Napoleonic Wars, when Britain blockaded Europe,
uh,
continental Europe really ramped up its beet sugar production because they couldn't easily import cane sugar.
Yeah.
By 1880, beets were the main source of sugar in Europe.
And even how people bought sugar changed. Those cones you mentioned.
The sugar loaves, yes, until the late 19th century, that's how you bought refined sugar. Solid cones.
And you needed special tools to break bits off.
You did. Sugar nips, they were called. Then eventually, granulated sugar sold in bags became the norm. Much more convenient.
And sugar cubes. Someone had to invent those.
Jacob Christoph Rad, in what's now the Czech Republic back in 1841, he got the idea after his wife injured herself cutting a sugar loaf.
Necessity is the mother of invention.
Indeed. And Henry Tate, of Tate and Lyle fame, he was an early manufacturer of cubes too, buying a patent later on.
Then came the World Wars. Rationing.
Yes. Sugar was rationed during World War I and even more strictly during World War II.
And that pushed artificial sweeteners forward.
It certainly helped drive their development and acceptance, yeah. When sugar was scarce, people looked for alternatives.
What a history. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's get into the science. What is sugar, chemically speaking?
Right. Scientifically, sugar is actually a broader term. It covers monosaccharides, disaccharides, and even oligosaccharides.
Okay, break those down for us. Monosaccharides.
Those are the simple sugars, the basic building blocks. Glucose is the most fundamental one.
And fructose, galactose, those are monosaccharides too.
Correct. Glucose, fructose, galactose. They all have the same chemical formulas, C6H12O6, but the atoms are arranged differently.
Giving them different properties, like sweetness.
Exactly. Fructose is the sweetest, generally.
So what are disaccharides then?
Di means two. So disaccharides are formed when two monosaccharides link together. A water molecule gets released in the process.
Like table sugar, sucrose.
Sucrose is the classic example. It's one glucose molecule joined to one fructose molecule. Formula C12H2O11.
And lactose, milk sugar.
That's glucose plus galactose. And maltose, malt sugar, is two glucose molecules joined together. Same formula, C12H22O11.
And when we eat these, our body breaks them back down.
Yes, through hydrolysis. Our digestive system breaks disaccharides back into their simpler monosaccharide components so we can absorb them.
What about longer chains? You mentioned oligosaccharides and polysaccharides.
Oligo means few, poly means many. So these are chains of more than two monosaccharides. Starch is a common polysaccharide. It's just long chains of glucose.
Got it. But some things taste sweet but aren't technically sugars.
That's a good point. Things like glycerol or sugar alcohols like xylitol or sorbitol, they taste sweet, but their chemical structure is different. They aren't carbohydrates in the same way.
Where do we find natural sugars?
They're in most plant tissues. Honey and fruits are obviously packed with simple sugars like fructose and glucose.
And sugar cane and sugar beet are special because
they have exceptionally high concentrations of sucrose. That's why they're so efficient for commercial extraction.
And maltose comes from grain, lactose from milk.
Yes, maltose is produced when grain is malted, like barley for beer. And lactose is pretty unique to milk and dairy products.
What about corn syrup? It's in everything.
High fructose corn syrup, yeah. It's made by breaking down cornstarch, usually enzymatically. It yields a mix of glucose and fructose and sometimes other sugars. It's cheap to produce, which is why it's so widely used in processed foods.
But sucrose, regular table sugar, is still dominant.
Still the main one used in prepared foods, ultra-processed stuff, and what we add ourselves.
How much do we actually eat, on average, globally?
Average is around 24 kilograms per person per year.
Yeah.
But it varies hugely.
More in some places, less in others?
Definitely. North and South Americans tend to consume a lot more, on average. Consumption in Africa is generally much lower.
And health bodies have guidelines on this, right?
Yes. The World Health Organization, the WHO, back in 2015, recommended cutting down on free sugars.
Free sugars? What does that mean exactly?
It means added sugars, the stuff manufacturers put in, or we add ourselves, plus sugars naturally present in honey, syrups, and fruit juices.
Ah, okay. Not the sugar naturally in whole fruit.
Correct. The recommendation is to get less than 10% of your total daily calories from these free sugars. Ideally, even less than 5% for added health benefits.
Because high intake is linked to problems.
Generally, yes. High sugar consumption is associated more with health risks, especially for cardiometabolic diseases, than with any real nutritional benefits.
Okay, shifting topics slightly. Sugar is flammable. That sounds dangerous.
It can be, very. Especially finely powdered sugar, like icing sugar. It creates a risk of dust explosions in factories or storage.
Like that big refinery explosion in Georgia.
Exactly, the 2008 Imperial sugar explosion. A tragic example of how dangerous sugar dust can be if ignited.
And heat does something else to sugar. Caramelization.
Right. When you heat sugar, it breaks down and undergoes complex chemical reactions. This releases volatile compounds.
Like diacetyl.
Like diacetyl, yes. And those compounds create the characteristic brown color and the delicious flavor and aroma of caramel.
Let's go back to those basic building blocks, the monosaccharides. Fructose, first fruit sugar. It's the sweetest.
Generally considered the sweetest of the common sugars, yes. Found naturally in fruits, honey, some root veggies, and it's half of sucrose. Also key in high fructose corn syrup.
Galactose. You don't hear about that one so much on its own.
Not usually found free in large amounts, no. It's mostly bound with glucose to make lactose milk sugar. It's less sweet than glucose. It's also part of certain antigens on our cells, like blood group markers.
And glucose, the big one, blood sugar.
The fundamental one, really.
Yeah.
Primary energy source for our cells. It's what photosynthesis produces in plants, found in fruits, plant juices.
And starch breaks down into glucose.
Yes, when we digest starch, it gets broken down into glucose, which then circulates in our blood. The natural form is D-glucose, sometimes called dextrose or grape sugar. Glucose syrup is just hydrolyzed starch.
Okay, now the disaccharides. Lactose milk sugar, galactose plus glucose, and the intolerance issue.
Comes from not having enough lactase, the enzyme needed to split lactose into glucose and galactose for absorption.
Right. Then maltose malt sugar, 2 glucose units.
Yep. Formed when grains germinate, barley becoming malt is a key example. Also happens during starch digestion in our bodies. It's less sweet than the others we've discussed.
And finally, sucrose. Table sugar, glucose plus fructose.
The most common one we think of is sugar, abundant in sugarcane and sugar beet, but also naturally in many fruits and some roots like carrots.
And the sweetness of, say, an apple versus a pear depends on the mix of these.
Exactly. The proportions of fructose, glucose, and sucrose vary a lot between different plant foods, contributing to their unique taste profiles.
We looked at a table showing sugar content in foods. Any surprises there?
It's quite revealing. You see, for example, dried figs and grapes are really high in total sugars, mostly fructose and glucose, whereas something like an apricot has a lot of sucrose relative to its total sugar. And vegetables, like red peppers or sweet onions, have some sugars, but generally much less than fruit.
And the table breaks it down into free fructose, free glucose, sucrose.
Yeah, and the ratio between fructose and glucose and how much of the total sugar is actually sucrose, it gives you a much more detailed picture than just total sugar.
And sugarcane and sugar beet just dwarf everything else in concentration.
Oh yeah, they're sucrose powerhouses. That's why they're the primary commercial sources.
Okay, so let's talk production. How do we get from those plants to the sugar bowl? Global production is up.
It increased about 14% between 2009 and 2018. China, Indonesia, the U.S. are big importers.
And the latest estimates?
For 2023-2024, world production is estimated around 194 million tons. Might even be a surplus.
Sugarcane is still king globally.
By volume, absolutely.
Yeah.
1.9 billion tons produced in 2022. Brazil leads, then India.
Billion.
Wow. It's a massive crop. These giant tropical grasses, they need warmth, plenty of rain.
And getting the sugar out, it's a process.
It is. Harvesting first, mechanical or manual, then juice extraction, either crushing the stalks in mills
Right.
or slicing them and using diffusion with water. Then you clarify the juice, usually with lime and heat, to get rid of impurities.
Then concentration.
Just evaporate off water to make a thick syrup. Then seed it with tiny sugar crystals to make larger crystals grow. Then dry them.
What about the leftover stuff? Molasses?
Molasses is the syrup left after crystallization. And bagasse is the fibrous plant material left after juice extraction, often burned for energy at the mill.
And the raw sugar crystals are brown.
Yes, they have a coating of molasses. You
Yeah.
can use it as raw sugar or it gets refined further, sometimes bleached with sulfur dioxide or treated using carbonatation,
Fermentation.
using carbon dioxide and lime, again, to precipitate out more impurities. It's also very water intensive. It takes about 2,500 liters of water to produce 1 kilo of sugar.
Okay, what about sugar beet? Different climate, different process.
Temperate climates, yeah. Russia was the top producer in 2022, about 260 million tons globally. It's a root vegetable, Beta vulgaris,
Harvested in autumn.
usually. Then washed, sliced into thin strips called cossettes. Sugar is extracted using hot water diffusion, similar to cane.
And the juice purification.
It's treated with milk of lime and carbon dioxide again, carbonatation to remove non-sugars. then evaporated, cooled, seeded, crystallized, spun in centrifuges to separate crystals from syrup, and dried.
But beet sugar doesn't usually need more refining.
Generally, the white sugar produced directly from beets is pure enough for most uses. Cane sugar often goes through an additional refining step.
Ah, okay, so what is refining exactly when we see refined sugar?
Refining is basically taking raw sugar, usually cane sugar, and cleaning it up further to remove that last bit of molasses and other impurities.
To get pure white sugar.
Exactly. Improves taste, appearance, storage qualities. It involves several steps.
Like what?
First, affination washing the raw crystals to remove the outer molasses layer, then dissolving the sugar in water to make a syrup.
Then more cleaning?
Syrup treatment, using maybe phosphatation or carbonatation again, then decolorization, filtering through activated carbon, or using ion exchange resins to remove color.
Then back to crystals.
Concentrate the purified syrup by boiling, crystallize again, spin it in centrifuges, dry it. White, refined sugar.
And the leftover syrup from that is refiner's molasses.
Correct. And purity is measured using ICMSA units. Lower number means purer sugar. Refined white sugar is usually below 300 ICMSA. Raw sugar might be over 1,500.
Okay, so we have the sugar, but it comes in so many different forms. Crystal size matters.
Keep time. Coarse grain sugar, like standing sugar. Big crystals, 1 to 3 millimeter, reflective, good for decorating, resists heat.
Then regular granulated table sugar.
Much smaller, around 0.6 millimeter, all-purpose. Table-use drinks, home baking. Provides sweetness, texture, and acts as a preservative in jams, candied fruit.
Powdered sugar, icing sugar.
That's milled really fine. For dusting, smooth frostings, confectionery.
Then castor sugar.
That's screened to get uniform, slightly finer crystals than granulated. Good for dissolving quickly, delicate baking, meringues.
What about shapes? Cubes.
Sugar cubes or lumps. Just granulated sugar, steamed and pressed together. Convenient for drinks.
And those old sugar loaves? Gone now, mostly.
Pretty much. That cone shape was standard until the late 19th century. A relic of the past.
Brown sugars are different how? Just molasses.
Essentially, yes. Either molasses left over from refining or white sugar with molasses added back in. Muscovado, turbinado, demerara. Different amounts of molasses.
Giving different colors and flavors.
Right. Light brown, dark brown.
Yeah.
Used in baking, confectionery, toffees where that richer, slightly moist quality is desired. More molasses means darker color, stronger flavor.
Then there are liquids. Syrups.
Simple syrup is just sugar dissolved in water. Used a lot in food processing drinks, candies, ice cream, jams.
Inverted sugar syrup. What's that?
That's made by heating sucrose with water, sometimes with an acid or enzyme. It breaks the sucrose into glucose and fructose.
Why do that?
Invert syrup is sweeter than sucrose, retains moisture better, and helps prevent crystallization in things like candies and baked goods. Used in breads, cakes, beverages.
And molasses itself. And treacle.
Byproducts of sugar refining. Thick, dark syrups, often blended with other syrups. Used for flavor and color in baked goods, like gingerbread, or candies like licorice and toffee.
Even wine uses sugar, right?
Yeah.
For fermentation.
Absolutely. Yeast consumes the natural fruit sugars to produce alcohol. Sometimes winemakers add extra sugar or chaptalization if the grapes aren't sweet enough.
Or stop fermentation early.
To leave residual sugar, making a sweet wine.
What about other sweeteners, like low-cal ones?
Often they use a bulking agent like maltodextrin.
Maltodextrin. That's not sugar.
It's a polysaccharide chains of glucose, so it's a carbohydrate, but not typically classified or regulated as a sugar, the same way simple sugars are. It's used to carry the high-intensity artificial sweetener.
And sugar alcohols. Polyols.
Like xylitol, sorbitol, used in chewing gum, sugar-free candies. They provide sweetness but are metabolized differently.
Okay, consumption. We said average is 24 kilograms globally. But some places eat way more.
Yes. Figures from 2016 suggested the U.S., Germany, Netherlands were among the highest per capita consumers. Historically, British diets saw a massive increase in sugar calories from, say, 1750 to recent times.
And nutritionally, white versus brown sugar. Is brown really healthier?
Not significantly, no. Per 100 grams, both are almost pure carbohydrate. Brown sugar has tiny amounts of minerals like iron from the molasses.
But not enough to matter.
In the amounts people normally eat, no. The main difference is flavor and moisture content due to that 5–10% molasses in brown sugar. It's not really about vitamins or minerals. It's still mostly empty calories.
Which brings us to health effects, the big topic. The general consensus is
High sugar intake is generally linked more to health problems than benefits, especially increased risk for cardiometabolic issues like type 2 diabetes, heart disease.
And there's that whole issue of industry influence on the research.
Yes, that's been a major point of discussion and investigation. There's evidence, detailed in some of our sources, showing significant spending by the sugar industry, particularly from the 60s onwards, potentially to downplay sugar's risks and maybe shift focus onto other nutrients, like saturated fat.
And this could bias research findings.
That's the concern. Some analyses have found that studies funded by the sugar industry were more likely to find no link between sugar and negative health outcomes compared to independently funded studies. It raises calls for transparency and avoiding industry funding in setting public health policy.
Okay, what about specific conditions? Obesity, metabolic syndrome.
The WHO noted back in 2003 that high intake of sugary drinks contributes to obesity by adding extra calories without much satiety.
So it's the overall calories.
Largely, yes. But meta-analyses consistently show that drinking a lot of sugar-sweetened beverages significantly increases the risk of type 2 diabetes and metabolic syndrome, which includes obesity and related issues in both adults and kids.
What about cancer? Does sugar feed cancer?
That's a common fear. But the direct evidence isn't there. Sugar consumption doesn't directly cause cancer.
Or make it grow faster.
No strong evidence for that either. The link is more indirect. High sugar intake can contribute to obesity, and obesity is a known risk factor for several types of cancer.
So limiting sugar is still advised?
Yes, as part of an overall healthy diet to maintain a healthy weight. But the idea of starving cancer by cutting out all sugar or carbs is generally considered a harmful myth. A balanced diet is best.
And cognition. Does sugar cause hyperactivity, the sugar rush?
The evidence for sugar causing hyperactivity is pretty weak, actually, often described as low quality.
So the sugar rush is a myth?
Largely, yes, according to a big 2019 review. It found sugar doesn't improve mood and can actually decrease alertness and increase fatigue within an hour or so.
What about energy drinks then? Kids drinking those?
Some studies link high-energy drink consumption in kids to issues like hyperactivity, insomnia, unhealthy behaviors. But it's hard to pin that solely on the sugar. There's caffeine, other stimulants. It's complex.
But the link with tooth decay?
Yeah.
That one's solid.
Very solid. WHO, Action on Sugar, UK's SACN, they all agree free sugars are the key dietary factor driving dental caries.
Cavities.
Exactly. And they say decay is largely preventable by cutting down on free sugars. Less than 10% of energy intake from sugar is linked to lower caries rates. Sugary drinks are a major culprit here, too.
And this idea of empty calories again, nutritional displacement.
Yeah. The concern is if you get a lot of your daily calories from added sugars, say over 25%, you might not be eating enough nutrient-dense foods like fruits, vegetables, whole grains. So your overall diet quality suffers, which can contribute to obesity and other issues. This might even happen at lower sugar intakes.
So what are the official recommendations again, WHO says?
Less than 10% of total daily energy from free sugars, ideally less than 5%.
And free sugars are added sugars, plus honey, syrups, fruit juice.
Correct. And in the U.S., the FDA now requires added sugars on the nutrition facts label. The daily value target is less than 50 grams a day for a 2,000-calorie diet.
Which lines up with the WHO's 10%.
Roughly, yes. But actual average intake in the U.S., based on surveys from a few years ago, was considerably higher than that 50-gram target.
Interesting detail from the sources. Different sugars have different densities.
Yeah, bulk density. Powdered sugar is less dense than granulated, which is less dense than beet sugar, for example. Matters for storage and measuring by volume.
And finally, just touching on society and culture, this idea about white sugar and purity.
Yes, the anthropologist Sidney Mintz argued that white sugar became the ideal, partly because white is often culturally associated with purity, status, refinement.
But not everywhere.
Interestingly, no. In parts of India, for some religious rituals requiring purity, the sugar used is specifically not supposed to be white. Jaggery or other less refined sugars might be preferred.
And we already mentioned the accusations against the industry about downplaying risks.
Right, particularly back in the 60s and 70s, influencing the debate about heart disease risk factors, led to calls for much better, unbiased research looking at multiple factors.
Okay, wow. That was a seriously deep dive into sugar.
It covers a lot of ground, doesn't it? From ancient India to modern chemistry and health debates.
We've gone from etymology, the history of how it spread,
The science of what it is,
yeah,
how it's made from cane and beet,
all the different forms it takes, how much we eat.
and the really complex and often controversial health impacts.
Hopefully we've pulled out some surprising facts, given you a few of those aha moments.
From sugar sculptures to the chemistry of caramel to its role in global history and migration, it's more than just sweetness.
Absolutely. And it's clear the story isn't over. Research on health impacts, debates about policy, They continue.
Which leaves us with something for you, the listener, to think about. How has this incredibly long, complex history of sugar actually shaped our modern world? Our diets, our health, even our landscapes?
And what role should it play going forward in our food, our health policies?
It makes you think about your own relationship with sugar, doesn't it? How much, what kind, why? Definitely food for thought. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're embarking on a journey through, well, 1,000 years of European history.
That's right, the Middle Ages. Roughly, what, 5th to the late 15th century?
Exactly. It's this immense period bridging classical antiquity and what we think of as the modern world.
And it's a period that, let's be honest, often gets boiled down to knights and castles.
Right. Or just the Dark Ages.
Yeah, which is such an oversimplification. Our goal in this deep dive is really to unpack these 1,000 years. We're drawing on a lot of historical info to understand the key phases, the changes.
The transformations.
Exactly, the remarkable transformations.
Okay, let's unpack this then. The term Middle Ages itself.
Yeah.
It brings up these images, like you said, knights, castles.
Sure.
But the reality, as the sources show, it's way more complex, way more dynamic.
Definitely.
We usually break it down, don't we? Early, high, and late Middle Ages.
That's the traditional subdivision, yeah. Each with its own distinct character, its own pivotal moments.
So where should we start this massive exploration?
I think the logical place is the early Middle Ages, roughly 5th to the 10th century.
Okay.
And this period is really shaped by the gradual end of the Western Roman Empire.
Not just a political collapse, though.
No, not at all. It triggers this huge migration period. We're talking various Germanic peoples, Goths, Vandals, Franks, Angles, Saxons, loads of them.
And it's key to remember, these weren't just armies.
Right, precisely. It wasn't solely military campaigns. Entire peoples were moving, migrating, settling.
So the whole map of Western Europe is essentially being redrawn.
Fundamentally reshaped, yeah. From the pieces of the Western Empire, you get new kingdoms emerging.
Oh, yeah.
Well, the Ostrogoths in Italy, the Franks pop up in modern France, roughly.
Huh?
The Visigoths in Iberia, so Spain and Portugal. And the Vandals, famously, in North Africa.
And each of these is kind of a blend, Roman and Germanic.
A fusion, exactly. New traditions forming out of old ones.
While all this is happening in the West.
Yeah.
What about the East, the Eastern Roman Empire?
Oh, yes. What we often call the Byzantine Empire after the West falls. They didn't just survive, they actually had something of an economic revival.
Really? So continuity there.
Strong continuity. Roman law, Roman culture. The Corpus Juris Civilis, Justinian's Code, is a huge example of that enduring legacy.
Justinian tried to get the West back too, didn't he?
He did. His campaigns in the 6th century reconquered parts of Italy, North Africa, even some of Spain. But it didn't last. It was a temporary thing, really.
Okay, so a real contrast. East holding on, West transforming. Let's go back to the West then. What did society look like after these upheavals?
The societal shifts were massive. You see the old Roman elite families kind of fading in prominence.
And literacy, land scholarship.
It shifted. Less focus on sort of high classical learning, more towards practical literacy needed for administration or the church.
And the aristocracy, what defined them?
Their culture changed, too. It became more centered around, big feasts, halls filled with loyal warriors, their military retinues.
So loyalty was key.
Absolutely. Loyalty, courage, honor. These were central, which unfortunately also led to a lot of feuding between powerful families.
And the ordinary people, the peasants. What do we know about them?
It's harder to get at from written sources, honestly. Archaeology helps a lot.
Okay.
Landholding patterns varied quite a bit, sometimes small plots, sometimes larger estates. What's interesting is the line between free peasants and the aristocracy wasn't always super sharp.
How so?
Well, a peasant family, maybe through generations of military service, could potentially rise up the social ladder. It wasn't completely static.
And cities. Roman cities must have changed drastically.
Oh, completely. In Italy, they shrank, definitely, but people still lived there. Old temples often became churches, the walls were still used.
And further north.
In Northern Europe, the decline was maybe more pronounced. Big public buildings often got scavenged for materials for new projects.
Right. And what about Jewish communities during this time?
They were present in Roman cities, of course.
Yeah.
After the empire became Christian, they faced increasing pressure. Officially tolerated, yes, but there are always efforts to encourage conversion.
Okay. Now, a huge development we absolutely have to talk about, the rise of Islam.
Can't miss that one. 7th century originates in Arabia and then boom, rapid expansion.
Where do they expand to?
Across North Africa, Middle East, and right into the Iberian Peninsula, Al-Andalus, as it became known.
We often hear about the Battle of Tours or Poitiers. Was that the big stop sign for expansion into Europe?
It's often framed that way, yes, 732. But the reality is maybe more complex. It certainly solidified a boundary, but the bigger long-term shift was perhaps internal to the Islamic world. The Umayyad Caliphate was overthrown by the Abbasids,
Yeah.
who focused more eastward, so control in the Western Mediterranean became more fragmented anyway.
So the Mediterranean, once this Roman lake, is now a frontier.
A major frontier zone, absolutely, between Christian Europe and the Islamic world, and that massively disrupted trade.
Oh, so what changed?
Those old established Mediterranean networks, pretty much broken for a while. Goods from Africa, for instance, largely vanished from Western European markets.
So local production becomes more important.
Much more important. And new trade patterns emerge.
Right.
Like between the Franks and the Arab world.
How were they trading?
Franks would trade things like timber, furs, swords, even slaves, sadly. In return, they got luxury goods, silks, spices, precious metals from the East via Arab merchants.
Sounds like the whole economic system was recalibrating.
It really was. Coinage reflects this too. Roman gold currency, gradually replaced by silver. Silver denarii, or pennies, become the standard in Frankish and Anglo-Saxon areas.
That spread.
Yeah, that silver-based system spreads across a lot of Europe between the 8th and 10th centuries.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. The church, obviously hugely influential.
Immensely. Initially, it was a unifying force, but the Arab conquests physically separated the eastern and western parts more definitively.
And they started to drift apart culturally, too.
Increasingly so. Language was a big one, Greek in the east, Latin in the west. But also religious practices, liturgy, even theology.
And politics played a role.
Big time. Disagreements over authority, especially the Pope's claims in the West versus a more council-based authority preferred in the East. It all built up,
Leading eventually to the split.
culminating in the Great Schism of 1054. That's the formal break between what become the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches.
And within Western Europe itself, the Pope's power was growing.
Gradually, yes. It wasn't like the powerful papacy of the High Middle Ages yet. The Bishop of Rome's authority was still developing.
But figures like Gregory the Great.
Exactly. Figures like Pope Gregory I in the late 6th century were very influential. His missions to convert the Anglo-Saxons, for example.
And missionaries from Ireland were important too, right?
Hugely important. People like Columbanus, they were vital in spreading Christianity and setting up monasteries across Western Europe, particularly in Frankish lands and beyond.
Monasteries seem like key institutions in this period.
Oh, absolutely fundamental, shaped by figures like Benedict of Nursia, who wrote his famous rule, and these Irish missionaries.
What do they actually do?
So much. They were centers of religious life, obviously, but also political hubs, major landowners, crucial for education and literacy,
In preserving knowledge?
critically important for that, copying manuscripts, preserving classical texts that might otherwise have been lost. They were powerhouses in many ways.
Which brings us neatly to the Franks.
Yes.
They seem central to this early medieval story.
They really are. The Frankish kingdom evolves significantly. From early divisions, you get the rise of the Carolingian dynasty.
Named after.
Charles Martel is a key early figure, victor at Poitiers. His son, Pippin III, actually takes the throne, deposing the old Merovingian kings. And then comes Pippin's son,
Charlemagne.
Charles the Great. His reign, late 8th, early 9th century, is a watershed moment.
Why so significant? Expansion.
Massive expansion, yes. He unites a huge chunk of Western and Central Europe, but also his coronation as emperor in Rome in 800.
A big symbolic moment.
Hugely symbolic, deliberately evoking the old Western Roman Empire. But his empire was different.
How different?
Much more rural. The court moved around constantly. Administration relied on local counts, overseen by these imperial inspectors, the Missi Dominici.
The emperor's eyes and ears.
Kinda, yeah. They traveled around, checked up on the counts, made sure imperial orders were followed, reported back. Crucial for managing such a vast realm.
And we also hear about the Carolingian Renaissance. What was that about?
It was a real cultural revival centered on Charlemagne's court at Aachen.
Focused on.
Increased literacy was a big goal.
Yeah.
Standardizing scripts, that's where Carolingian minuscule comes in, a much clearer script.
Making copying easier.
Much easier, much more accurate. Also, big advances in art, architecture, law, studying religious texts, standardizing liturgy.
Key figures involved.
Alcuin of York, an English scholar, was hugely important at Charlemagne's court, and this period was vital for preserving and spreading texts, both classical and Christian. Medieval Latin also really takes shape then.
But like many empires, it didn't last forever.
No. After Charlemagne's son, Louis the Pious, things started to fray. His sons fought over the inheritance.
Leading to a formal split.
Yes, the Treaty of Verdun in 843. It divided the empire into 3 parts, roughly laying the groundwork for later France and Germany. West Francia, East Francia, and a middle kingdom.
And this division made them vulnerable.
Absolutely. Internal fracturing coincided with new external pressures.
Like?
Vikings raiding from the north and west, Magyars invading from the east, and continued pressure and expansion from fragmented Islamic states in the south. A tough time.
But even amidst that chaos, things like missionary work continued.
Yes, efforts to convert Scandinavia were ongoing. And in Iberia, the small Christian kingdoms in the north slowly began to push south, the early stages of the Reconquista.
Meanwhile, back in the east, what was Byzantium up to?
They actually had a resurgence under the Macedonian dynasty from the mid-9th century.
A revival.
Yeah, commercial revival, better administration, military reorganization leading to some territorial gains, and another cultural flourishing, the Macedonian Renaissance, focused on classical learning.
And Byzantine influence spread.
Yes, through missionary work, both Byzantine and Western efforts led to the conversion of peoples in Eastern Europe. This helped shape new states like Moravia, Bulgaria, Bohemia, Poland, Hungary, and Kievan Rus.
Okay, before we leave the early Middle Ages, just quickly, art, architecture, military stuff.
Architecturally, you see the Roman basilica form revived for churches, but with new elements like transepts and crossing towers appearing. Militarily,
I'll refocus.
late Roman Empire focused heavily on cavalry, yeah. The Germanic groups had varied styles. The Hunnic composite bow was a game changer. Longswords, mail armor become more common.
And Charlemagne's forces?
Heavy cavalry was dominant then, but the crossbow makes a comeback, and crucial innovations like the stirrup.
Making cavalry more effective.
Much more stable platform for fighting. And the horseshoe, vital for protecting horses' hooves. Both had huge long-term impacts.
Wow. Okay, so the early Middle Ages, definitely not dark, but a period of massive change, breakdown, rebuilding new formations.
Absolutely, setting the stage, really, for what comes next.
Which is the High Middle Ages.
Exactly, roughly 11th to the late 13th centuries. A period of, well, significant growth.
Okay, High Middle Ages. Sources point to a big population boom across Europe. What's driving that?
Several things seem to line up. Better farming techniques, new technologies.
Like the heavy plow?
The heavy plow, horse collars, using legumes more, things that increased food production. There's also the theory of the medieval warm period, slightly better climate.
Fewer invasions, too.
Generally, yes. A bit more stability compared to the previous centuries. All this allows the population to grow quite dramatically.
Yeah, and most people are still living.
Overwhelmingly rural peasants living in villages or on manors, part of the manorial system.
Right, manorialism and feudalism. These are the classic systems we associate with this time, aren't they?
They are the dominant structures, yes. Manorialism is the economic side. Peasants working the lord's land, owing him rent, labor services.
And feudalism.
That's more the political and military framework.
Right.
Knights and nobles holding land fiefs from higher lords in return for military service.
Were all peasants unfree serfs?
No, it's important to remember there were still free peasants, especially in some regions like southern Europe, and people were also creating new farmland by clearing forests or draining marshes. That's asserting.
Adding to the agricultural output.
Exactly. And the open field system with crop rotation was pretty standard across large parts of Europe.
Society feels very layered, very hierarchical then. Can you sketch out the main groups?
Broadly, you've got the nobility from kings down to simple knights, then the clergy priests, bishops, monks, nuns, and then the townspeople or burghers.
And nobility was based on?
Land ownership, primarily. Fiefs became increasingly hereditary, often passed to the eldest son primogeniture. Their power also came from military service, heavy cavalry, controlling castles.
And castles become a big thing now.
Huge. Evolving from wood to massive stone structures, centers of power, defense, administration. Nobles also had certain legal immunities.
And the towns are growing too.
Definitely. The 12th and 13th centuries see a real expansion of towns and cities. A distinct urban class emerges, though still a small percentage of the overall population.
What about Jewish communities in this period?
They spread across Europe, often concentrated in these growing towns as they were frequently barred from owning land. But they also faced increasing persecution and restrictions, especially in places like Spain.
And women's roles? Still largely subordinate.
Generally, yes, expected to be subordinate to men, fathers, husbands. But widows could have significant autonomy, though legal limits remained.
What kind of work did women do?
Peasant women had crucial household roles. Childcare, cooking, making clothes, tending animals, gardening, plus helping in the fields, especially at harvest. They often supplemented income by spinning or brewing.
And in towns, noblewomen.
Townswomen managed households but could also be involved in trade, crafts, running businesses, sometimes alongside husbands or as widows. Noble women ran large households, managed estates when husbands were away, but had limited direct roles in government or warfare. Church life offered the role of a nun.
Okay.
Yeah.
The High Middle Ages also seems like a boom time for trade.
Absolutely. You get self-governing towns, especially in Italy, Venice, Genoa, and Flanders, becoming major economic engines.
Trade networks expanding.
Massively. Think of the Hanseatic League dominating the Baltic trade, the Italian republics controlling Mediterranean routes, huge trading fairs in places like Champagne in France,
Connecting different regions.
connecting Europe internally and also looking outwards. New routes to the Far East start being explored. Marco Polo is the famous example.
What enabled this trade expansion?
Better farming meant surpluses to trade. Technological improvements helped too, and finance became more sophisticated.
How so?
Gold coins reappear alongside silver. New business contracts, partnerships develop. Better accounting, double-entry bookkeeping starts to appear. And things like letters of credit made moving money easier and safer.
And politically. Are states becoming stronger?
Yes, we see a definite trend towards consolidation of power, especially in France, England, and Spain. Kings are building up more permanent administrative structures.
New kingdoms emerging too.
Kingdoms like Hungary and Poland become major players in Central Europe after converting to Christianity. And the papacy
The Pope's power.
reaches its peak, really, in terms of asserting authority over secular rulers. Pope Innocent III is often seen as the high point of papal power.
And expansion continues, like the Northern Crusades.
Yes, German expansion eastward, the activities of military orders like the Teutonic Knights in the Baltic region, often involving forced conversion and assimilation of local peoples.
What's the political picture in, say, Germany, France, England?
Germany, part of the Holy Roman Empire, sees emperors struggling with powerful nobles and the Pope. The investiture controversy over appointing bishops was a huge conflict there.
France.
The Capetian kings start small around Paris, but gradually, cleverly expand their royal power and territory over centuries.
And England.
Big event is the Norman Conquest, 1066. Creates this Anglo-Norman realm across the Channel. Later, conflicts between kings and nobles lead to things like Magna Carta in 1215, limiting royal power.
Normans were active elsewhere too.
Oh, yes. Southern Italy and Sicily became a major Norman kingdom.
And Iberia, the Reconquista.
Continues throughout the High Middle Ages. Christian kingdoms in the north gradually push south, capturing key cities like Toledo, though powerful Islamic states like the Almohads still controlled large parts of the south.
Which brings us to the Crusades to the Holy Land, a defining feature of this era.
Absolutely central. Kicked off by Pope Urban II's call in 1095.
What were the main drivers?
Partly responding to the expansion of the Seljuk Turks, who threatened the Byzantine Empire and controlled access to Jerusalem, partly religious fervor, partly ambitions of nobles, complex motivations.
The First Crusade was successful.
Surprisingly, yes. It captured Jerusalem in 1099 and led to the setup of several Crusader states in the Levant.
But it wasn't peaceful.
Far from it, marked by extreme violence, including terrible massacres of Jewish communities in Europe along the way.
And the Crusader states survive.
They survived for nearly 2 centuries, but were always precarious, constantly fighting neighboring Muslim powers. Later crusades like the Third with Richard the Lionheart or the disastrous Fourth, which sacked Christian Constantinople.
Sacked Constantinople.
Yes, a major shock. It massively weakened the Byzantine Empire. Ultimately, by 1291, the last Crusader strongholds on the mainland were lost.
Were there other crusades?
Yes, the concept was applied elsewhere. The Reconquista in Spain was often framed as a crusade, Crusades against heretics in southern France, like the Albigensian Crusade,
Yeah.
and the Northern Crusades we mentioned.
Wow. Okay, let's shift to intellectual life. Seems like a real flourishing.
A huge resurgence of learning, yes. The 11th and 12th centuries especially. Big philosophical debates like realism versus nominalism.
What's that, briefly?
Do universal concepts like beauty or justice actually exist independently, realism, or are they just names we give to collections of individual things? Nominalism. Big stuff.
And Aristotle comes back.
Rediscovering Aristotle's works, often via translations from Arabic, was revolutionary. Applying his logic to theology scholars like Peter Abelard were pioneers there.
Where is this learning happening? Monastery stuff.
Learning shifts from monasteries more towards cathedral schools associated with bishops, and then, crucially, the rise of universities. Bologna, Paris, Oxford.
And the main intellectual movement.
Scholasticism, trying to synthesize Christian faith with Aristotelian philosophy and reason. Thomas Aquinas is the towering figure here. His Summa Theologica is a landmark.
Culturally, we get things like chivalry and courtly love.
Yes, these ideals develop among the nobility. Chivalry as a code for knights' bravery, loyalty, courtesy. Courtly love as this elaborate, often idealized form of romantic devotion.
Expressed in literature.
Absolutely, in vernacular languages, not just Latin. Troubadours in southern France, Minnesingers in Germany writing lyric poetry, epic poems like the Song of Roland. Histories were being written too.
And law.
Big developments. Rediscovering Justinian's code sparks intense study of Roman law. Canon law, the law of the church, is also systematized, notably by Gratian.
There's also influence from outside Europe.
Significant influence from the Greek and Islamic worlds, especially through Spain and Sicily. Things like our modern number system, the decimal system with 0, comes via the Arab world. Algebra develops there too.
Science. Medicine.
Astronomy advances with translations of works like Ptolemy's Almagest. Medicine sees progress, with centers like Salerno in Italy drawing on Greek and Arabic knowledge.
What about technology and military stuff in the High Middle Ages?
Lots of innovation. Windmills become widespread. Mechanical clocks start appearing. Distilled spirits are invented. Navigation tools like the astrolabe. Even eyeglasses, concave spectacles.
Agriculture, too.
The three-field system spreads. Heavy plow, horse collar, all boosting food production. Castle building reaches new heights of sophistication. Shipbuilding improves better hulls, lateen sails, the stern post rudder for better steering.
Warfare.
Infantry becomes more specialized. Think crossbowmen, engineers, sappers. Crossbows get more powerful, which drives improvements in armor. Mites are still dominant, but things are changing. Gunpowder is known, but not yet decisive.
And finally, architecture, art, church life.
Architecturally, we move from Romanesque, solid round arches, thick walls, small windows.
Sturdy looking.
Very sturdy. To Gothic, starting in France. Pointed arches, ribbed vaults, flying buttresses allowing thinner walls, and huge stained glass windows.
Flooding churches with light.
Exactly. Symbolizing divine light, but also showing off the wealth and skill of the cities building them. Church life sees major reform movements, like the Cluniac reforms aiming to purify monasticism.
And the investiture controversy we mentioned.
That huge clash between Pope Gregory VII and Emperor Henry V over who appoints bishops. New monastic orders arise, Cistercians, Carthusians, emphasizing simplicity or austerity.
Pilgrimages become popular.
Hugely popular. And new types of religious orders emerge, the mendicants, like the Franciscans and Dominicans, who live and preach among the people in towns, renouncing property.
Were there challenges to the church?
Yes. Various popular religious movements arose, some deemed heretical by the church, like the Waldensians or the Cathars, leading to suppression.
So the High Middle Ages sounds incredibly energetic. Growth, expansion, conflict, innovation.
A really dynamic period across the board. But this energy eventually shifts, faces new challenges leading into the late Middle Ages.
Right, which takes us from roughly the late 13th to the late 15th century.
Yeah.
And this period, well, it often gets painted as one of crisis.
It certainly faced immense challenges: famine, plague, war. It's a dramatic period.
Let's start with the calamities. Famine first.
The early 14th century saw repeated, severe food shortages. The worst was the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317.
What caused it?
Seems largely climate-related. The end of the medieval warm period, start of the Little Ice Age, colder, wetter weather led to massive crop failures across northern Europe. Populations were already stretched thin.
Making them vulnerable to.
Exactly. And then the big one hits. The Black Death. Arrives in Europe around 1347.
Plague.
Bubonic plague, primarily,
Yep.
spreads like wildfire. The death toll is just staggering. Estimates are around a third of Europe's entire population died in just a few years.
A third. That's unimaginable.
Hard to even comprehend the impact, and it didn't just hit once. It kept coming back in waves for decades, centuries even.
What are the consequences, besides the obvious death toll?
Profound. Massive labor shortages. Suddenly peasants have more bargaining power. Agriculture gets disrupted. Land values shift. Huge psychological impact, too.
Leading to unrest.
Widespread social unrest. Big peasant revolts like the Jacquerie in France or the Peasants' Revolt in England. People questioning the old order.
And religiously.
A complex mix. Increased piety in some ways, flagellant movements trying to appease God's wrath, but also scapegoating, particularly horrific attacks on Jewish communities, falsely blaming them for the plague.
How did society and the economy actually change in the aftermath?
With fewer people, marginal farmland was often just abandoned. Serfdom declines faster in Western Europe. Lords needed workers, had to offer better terms, often commuting labor services to cash rents.
But not everywhere.
Interestingly, in Eastern Europe, the opposite often happened. Lords tightened their grip on peasants, reinforcing serfdom.
Other shifts. Literacy, culture.
Literacy continues to slowly spread beyond the clergy. We see townspeople starting to imitate noble culture, interest in chivalry, tournaments, that sort of thing.
And Jewish communities.
This period sees major expulsions. England expelled its Jewish population earlier, France did too, Spain eventually in 1492. Many migrated eastward to Poland and other areas. Banking, meanwhile.
Still strong in Italy.
Yeah, Italian banking houses like the Medici become even more powerful. Financing wars, popes, trade.
Politically, you said states became stronger despite the crises. Seems counterintuitive.
It does, but prolonged warfare especially forced rulers to develop better systems of taxation and administration to fend their armies.
Building state capacity.
Exactly. We see stronger, more centralized monarchies emerging in England, France, Spain. Representative bodies like the English Parliament or the French Estates General also gain influence, as kings need their consent for taxes.
The 100 Years' War is the big conflict here, isn't it?
Yeah.
England versus France.
Dominates the period, 1337 to 1453. Not continuous fighting, but a long series of campaigns.
Key moments. Technology.
Early English victories, often thanks to the longbow, think Crécy, Agincourt. Then a French resurgence, famously inspired by Joan of Arc. Eventually, France wins, consolidating its territory.
And it shaped identities.
Hugely important in forging distinct English and French national identities. Militarily, besides the longbow, cannons start appearing on battlefields, beginning to challenge the dominance of castles.
What about elsewhere in Europe during this late period?
The Holy Roman Empire remains fragmented, the emperor's power limited by strong princes. Poland, Hungary, Bohemia are significant kingdoms in the east. Iberia sees Christian kingdoms consolidating, Portugal starting its overseas voyages.
And England after the 100 Years' War?
They have their own internal conflict, the Wars of the Roses, between the houses of Lancaster and York, eventually settled by Henry Tudor, Henry VII, establishing a new dynasty.
Scandinavia. The Baltic.
The Union of Kalmar tries to unite the Scandinavian kingdoms, but faces internal strains. The Hanseatic League remains powerful in Baltic trade. Scotland manages to maintain its independence from England, notably under Robert the Bruce earlier on.
And the Byzantine Empire. Its final chapter.
Sadly, yes. Already weakened, especially after the Fourth Crusade, it faced the relentless rise of the Ottoman Turks.
The Ottomans expanded into the Balkans.
Yes, defeating Serbian forces at Kosovo, crushing a Western European crusade at Nicopolis. The end finally came with the Ottoman siege and capture of Constantinople in 1453, a major turning point.
The church also seems to be in crisis during this time.
Big time.
Yeah.
First, the Avignon papacy, the popes residing in France, seen as under French influence. Then the Great Schism.
Multiple popes.
Yes, for decades, 2, sometimes even 3 rival popes claiming legitimacy, hugely damaging to the church's prestige.
How was it resolved?
Eventually by the Council of Constance in the early 15th century, but the damage was done. Theological controversies also flared up.
Like Wycliffe and Huss.
John Wycliffe in England, questioning church doctrines and authority, inspiring the Lollards. John Huss in Bohemia, similar ideas, leading to the Hussite movement and wars after he was burned at the stake.
And the Knights Templar.
They were suppressed earlier in the early 14th century, accused of heresy and other crimes, likely motivated by the French king's desire for their wealth.
How did religious practice change for ordinary people?
The way Mass was celebrated often increased the sense of separation between clergy and laity. But popular piety remained strong, devotion to saints, relics, pilgrimages continued. Mysticism also flourished figures like Meister Eckhart.
But also darker beliefs, witchcraft.
Yes, the belief in harmful witchcraft seems to have intensified. The church eventually condemns it more formally, leading to texts like the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches, which fueled later witch hunts.
Despite all this turmoil, intellectual life, culture, exploration continued.
Absolutely. In philosophy, thinkers like Duns Scotus and William of Ockham reacted against aspects of Aquinas' scholasticism, emphasizing divine will or questioning universal concepts. Legal studies remained important.
Education. So sure.
Universities kept spreading, though still mainly training clergy. Lay literacy slowly increased, and vernacular literature truly blossomed. Dante's Divine Comedy, Petrarch's sonnets, Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, Christine de Pizan's writings, huge figures.
New movements, technology.
The Devotio Moderna emphasized a more personal, inward piety. Theater developed further. And then the game changer. Gutenberg's invention of the printing press with movable type, around 1450.
Revolutionizing information.
Fundamentally, an exploration kicks off. Portugal, under Prince Henry the Navigator, starts pushing down the African coast. Dias rounds the Cape of Good Hope. Vasco da Gama reaches India.
And Spain gets involved.
Yes, sponsoring Columbus's voyage in 1492, searching for a westward route to Asia. England sponsors John Cabot shortly after. The age of exploration is dawning.
Quick highlights on late medieval tech and military.
Militarily, infantry and lighter cavalry become more important again. Plate armor reaches its peak development. Pole arms are key for infantry formations like the Swiss pikemen.
Agriculture, other tech.
Things like refining wool production, the spinning wheel becoming common, buttons for clothing, better windmills, the tower mill, the blast furnace improves iron making. Venice even introduces the first patent law to protect inventions.
So the late Middle Ages. Crisis, yes, but also adaptation, innovation, and ultimately the launchpad for the early modern world.
Exactly, a period of profound disruption, but also incredible resilience and change, laying groundwork for so much that followed.
So this whole deep dive, covering this vast 1,000 years, it really hammers home that the stereotype of the Dark Ages just doesn't hold up, does it?
Not at all. It's a massive oversimplification. And there are specific myths that still linger, things our sources clearly contradict.
Like the idea that it was just a time of ignorance and superstition, that the church just stamped out all reason.
That's probably the biggest one. This view, which really comes from later periods like the Renaissance and Enlightenment wanting to contrast themselves, it just doesn't fit the evidence.
So reason wasn't suppressed.
On the contrary, reason ratio was seen as a powerful tool, a gift from God. Medieval scholars, especially in what they called natural philosophy, often felt quite free to investigate the world using reason and observation.
People like Edward Grant or David Lindbergh argue this strongly, right?
Yes. Lindbergh specifically points out that scholars studying nature rarely felt constrained by church authority and prioritized reason and evidence in their work.
What about specific myths? The flat earth one is classic.
Ah, yes. The idea that everyone in the Middle Ages thought the earth was flat.
Completely wrong.
Almost entirely wrong. Since the ancient Greeks, educated people knew the earth was a sphere. Medieval university lecturers taught it was spherical, based on works like Ptolemy's. They even had pretty decent estimates for its size.
So Columbus wasn't arguing against flat earthers.
No, the debate was about the size of the earth and the distance to Asia sailing west, not its shape.
Other myths, like the church banning dissections.
Also largely inaccurate. While there were some restrictions related to the treatment of bodies, dissection for anatomical study did occur, particularly from the 13th century onwards. The idea that Christianity killed ancient science is another broad misconception.
Medieval thinkers engaged with science or natural philosophy.
Absolutely. They built upon, debated, and sometimes corrected the ancient knowledge they inherited. It was far more intellectually vibrant than the dark stereotype allows.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, it's just crystal clear, isn't it? The Middle Ages were anything but stagnant or merely in the middle.
Far from it. Incredibly dynamic, transformative, absolutely foundational for everything that came after in European history.
1,000 years packed with change, adaptation, innovation, political shifts, cultural flowering, societal restructuring.
Echoes of which are still with us today, definitely.
So if anything, we've touched on today the fall of Rome, the rise of Islam, feudal society, the Crusades, the Black Death, Gothic cathedrals, the stirrup, the printing press, any of it.
If it sparked your interest.
And we really hope you'll dig deeper. because the Middle Ages offer this incredibly rich, complex, and endlessly fascinating picture of the past. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive. Picture this: a railway burrowing its way under the, well, often stormy English Channel.
Mm,
It's not fiction. It's the real deal. The one and only fixed link connecting Great Britain to mainland Europe.
yeah.
Now, you might think you've got the gist, but honestly, the story's got layers, surprising turns, mind-blowing engineering, and a centuries-long quest to make it happen. Prepare for some genuine aha moments as we dig into this.
Exactly. Today's deep dive takes us into the fascinating world of the Channel Tunnel. We're going to explore its long history, break down the incredible engineering feats that made it possible, and see how it functions day in and day out.
And this isn't just hearsay. We've compiled a really detailed overview, packed with information.
Right.
We'll be sifting through those initial, sometimes kind of crazy proposals, the actual hard work of construction, the sheer brilliance of the engineering involved, and the impact it's had since it first opened.
Our goal here is to extract the most important and intriguing insights from all of that. We want to give you a real grasp of this monumental project, sort of a shortcut to being truly informed without getting lost in overly technical details.
Yeah, wading through everything could be tough.
Exactly. We'll be balancing the big picture with those specific memorable bits that really make the story stick.
Okay, let's unpack this right from the start.
Mm-hmm.
Would you believe the very first concrete idea for a tunnel under the channel popped up way back in 1802?
1802.
Yeah, thanks to a French mining engineer named Albert Mathieu Favet, and his vision was pretty out there.
How so?
Imagine a tunnel lit by oil lamps. Oil lamps.
Quite.
Designed for horse-drawn coaches.
Horse-drawn under the channel.
And get this, he even suggested an artificial island mid-channel to swap out the horses.
Seriously, change horses mid-journey, under the sea. That's ambitious.
Fantastical, maybe.
Well, what's truly insightful here is how even these early ideas identified core engineering problems that would remain central for centuries. Mathieu Favier's concept of a two-level tunnel, separating transport from groundwater, already shows an awareness of potential hurdles, like water ingress.
Gotcha. So even the wild ideas had some engineering thought behind them.
Some, yeah. Now, flash forward a few decades, and another Frenchman, Aimé Thomas de Gamon, really started to get practical.
Okay.
From 1839, he conducted the first serious geological surveys. By 1856, he had a detailed plan for a mined railway tunnel from Cap Grisnez to East Ware Point.
A railway this time. More realistic.
Definitely. And here's a surprising tidbit for you. He even envisioned a port and air shaft on the Varne sandbank, right in the middle of the channel.
An island again. Or a sandbank structure.
Yeah, a structure on the sandbank. Plus his estimated cost back then, less than £7 million.
Wow. Seems cheap now, but probably a fortune then.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, we see a recurring theme. French engineers often taking the initiative, really driven by this vision of a closer connection. Thomas de Gamon's work was significant, not just for his specific proposal, but for establishing a foundation with actual geological data, moving it forward.
But here's where the story hits a recurring roadblock. Despite these innovative ideas and surveys, there was this constant wave of political and military resistance in Britain.
Yes, the security fears.
Exactly. Even back in the late 19th century and well into the 20th, any tunnel proposal seemed to set off major national security alarms. They were convinced it would be an invasion route. So the real insight isn't just that there was opposition, but that national security fears consistently trumped even compelling engineering advancements for such a long time, right?
That's a crucial point. The 1883 abandonment of the Anglo-French Submarine Railway Company, that really highlights it.
They'd actually started digging then, hadn't they?
They had. Even after successful exploratory work had progressed over a mile from the English side using a tunnel boring machine. They still shut it down because of those security concerns.
It almost seems unbelievable now, but these fears were very real.
Oh, very.
Yet, you had figures like Winston Churchill in the 1920s and 30s strongly arguing in favor of the tunnel.
Yeah, Churchill's perspective offers a valuable counterpoint.
He even wrote an essay specifically tearing down the invasion fear argument.
He did. His focus was much more on the economic and social benefits, while directly addressing and, refuting the military objections. It shows a different way of looking at the whole issue.
And the on-again, off-again saga just continued.
Yeah.
In 1974, a government-backed project between the UK and France actually got off the ground.
Right, the 70s attempt.
They started digging on both sides, but then, boom, 1975, the UK pulled the plug.
Economic uncertainty was the reason given.
Yeah. It must have been a huge disappointment, though.
Oh, definitely. And what's particularly poignant for you to note is the fate of the French tunnel boring machine from that era.
What happened to it?
It was just left abandoned underground for 14 years.
No way.
Yeah. But eventually it was recovered, refurbished, and incredibly used to build a tunnel in Turkey.
Wow, that's quite a second life for a TBM.
It is. It's a small detail, but it speaks volumes about the ingenuity involved, even after a major setback like that cancellation.
Okay, so let's fast forward to the 1980s. Despite that setback in the 70s, the dream of a channel tunnel clearly didn't die.
Not at all.
Let's see how a new approach focusing on private funding finally broke the deadlock.
This shift towards private finance was really a significant turning point.
And Margaret Thatcher, the UK Prime Minister at the time, she even initially thought it would be a road tunnel for cars.
That's right. Her initial vision, while different from the ultimately chosen rail link, highlights the changing political and economic landscape surrounding the project. Less state funding, more private enterprise.
So by 1985, they had a short list of 4 proposals. And this is where it gets really interesting for you.
Okay.
Yes, the chosen rail proposal from the Channel Tunnel Group France Manche was there. But so were some truly wild ideas.
Like what?
We're talking about a suspension bridge inside a tube.
Huh. How would that even work?
I know. And even artificial islands connected by tunnels. It really shows the breadth of ambitious thinking at the time. Throwing everything at the wall.
Well, this diversity of proposals really underscores the magnitude of the challenge and the various ways engineers and designers were trying to solve it.
Makes sense.
The fact that the rail proposal, which kind of built on the earlier 1975 scheme, ultimately prevailed, suggests a recognition of its relative practicality and probably lower risk compared to, say, a bridge in a tube.
Yeah, maybe slightly less risky.
Right.
Then came a crucial moment in 1986. The Treaty of Canterbury.
Ah, the green light.
This was the agreement that finally allowed the project to proceed. It set up the Intergovernmental Commission, and get this, it even established a unique land border right in the middle of the tunnel.
Which is pretty unusual, isn't it? A border underground, underwater.
Totally unique.
The Treaty of Canterbury provided the essential framework, though. It wasn't just the legal basis for construction and operation, but it also addressed all those complex binational aspects, safety oversight, regulations.
And that symbolic line in the middle.
Exactly.
The actual construction was, of course, a massive undertaking. You had the Channel Tunnel Group on the British side and France Manche on the French side.
Right.
Working together under the umbrella of Trans-Manche Link, or TML.
That kind of collaborative structure was absolutely necessary, wasn't it? For a project of this sheer scale, bringing together expertise from both nations in engineering, finance, construction, everything.
And then came the tunneling itself, starting in 1988 from both the English and French coasts.
The big dig begins.
They used an astounding 11 tunnel boring machines. In total, 6 on the UK side and 5 on the French.
11 TBMs, that's serious hardware.
And here's a detail I found fascinating for you. The different ground conditions on each side meant they had to use different types of TBM.
Oh, how so?
Open-faced on the English side and earth pressure balance machines on the French.
Okay, so think of it this way. The English chalk, particularly the chalk marl layer they aimed for, was quite stable, good for tunneling.
Yeah.
So they could basically just bore through it, hence open-faced TBMs.
Right.
Whereas the geology on the French side was more varied, potentially more unstable in places. So they needed machines that could actively manage the pressure of the soil and rock at the cutting face to prevent collapses.
The earth pressure balance machines.
Exactly. That technological adaptation to the specific geology is a really key takeaway. It wasn't just brute force, it was smart engineering reacting to the conditions.
And the geology itself, that chalk marl stratum,
Yeah.
it was crucial, wasn't it? Kind of the sweet spot.
Absolutely. It's relatively easy to excavate, but also impermeable, meaning it keeps the water out, mostly.
Yeah.
Finding that consistent layer was key to the whole project's feasibility.
So the moment the service tunnel broke through, that must have been incredible. December 1990.
A huge milestone.
And the precision. They were aiming for each other from miles away underwater, and the offset was only 36.2 centimeters.
Phenomenal accuracy. A testament to the surveying and guidance systems and just the skill of the tunneling teams.
And the British tunnelers even sent a Paddington Bear soft toy through the probe hole first to reach their French counterparts.
Huh. I remember hearing about that.
Just a little human touch in this massive engineering endeavor, something memorable for you.
Definitely. That Paddington Bear anecdote adds a charming human element to what was an intensely technical achievement.
Finally, after all those years of proposals, setbacks, and just immense effort, the Channel Tunnel officially opened in May 1994.
A long time coming.
Queen Elizabeth II and President Mitterrand met in Calais, their trains nose to nose. A truly symbolic moment.
Absolutely. The culmination of a centuries-long ambition.
And it's worth remembering the significant cost overrun, isn't it?
Yes. That often happens with these mega projects.
The final bill was $4.65 billion compared to the initial $2.6 billion estimate back in 1985 prices.
A substantial increase.
A lot of that extra cost came from enhanced safety and security measures, though, which, you can understand.
Precisely. While the overrun was large, the increased investment in safety and security reflects the paramount importance of those factors in such a unique undertaking. You can't cut corners there.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
So let's dive into the actual engineering and operation now. The sheer size of this thing is just mind-boggling.
It really is.
We're talking about 2 main rail tunnels and a surface tunnel,
Right, the three-tunnel system,
each stretching over 50 kilometers, with nearly 38 kilometers of that underwater.
which makes it the longest underwater section of any tunnel in the world. Still is.
Wow. And at its deepest point, it's 75 meters below the seabed. That's deep.
The dimensions alone are remarkable, but it's the integrated design of the three tunnels that's truly ingenious, I think.
How so?
Well, the service tunnel isn't just for maintenance vehicles or whatever. It plays a vital role in ventilation and, crucially, emergency access and evacuation.
Ah, right. The safe haven.
Exactly. It significantly increases the overall safety and functionality for you, the user.
And the railway design itself is pretty cutting edge, or at least it was. Standard gauge tracks.
Linking seamlessly to the high-speed lines on both sides, the LGV Nord in France and High Speed 1 in the UK.
Overhead electrification, 25 kV AC, and a really advanced cab signaling system called TVM 430.
Yeah, that was state-of-the-art. It allows for high speeds, although they're currently capped at 160 kilometers, about 100 millibert, mainly for safety and energy reasons within the tunnel.
So this signaling system, it essentially communicates directly with the train's computer for precise control.
That's the gist of it, yeah. Allows for shorter headways between trains and safe operation at higher speeds in that confined tunnel environment. Much better than traditional line-side signals.
They even chose a special low-vibration track system, didn't they?
Yeah.
For stability and minimal upkeep.
Right, the LVT system, using concrete blocks embedded in special foam pads.
So this special track isn't just about a smoother ride for passengers. It's also about reducing wear and tear and the need for constant maintenance, which must be a nightmare in a tunnel.
Precisely. The selection of the track system demonstrates a real focus on long-term efficiency and reliability, alongside passenger comfort. Maintenance in the tunnel is complex and expensive, so anything to reduce it is a win.
Then there's the whole issue of keeping things running smoothly, literally. The ventilation system.
Critically important.
It maintains higher air pressure in the service tunnel for fire safety, which is a really smart feature. If there's a fire in a running tunnel, smoke is less likely to get into the service tunnel.
Exactly. It creates a safe escape route. There are huge fans at both ends and supplementary systems too.
And with high-speed trains generating a lot of heat, cooling must be a big deal.
Oh, absolutely. Friction, electronics, brakes, it all generates heat. They have a massive cooling water system with pipes running the length of the tunnels.
And I read they recently upgraded it to more environmentally friendly chillers.
They did, yeah. Replacing the older R22 refrigerant units, it shows that ongoing investment in keeping the systems efficient and greener, managing air quality, temperature, even water drainage in such a confined, busy place needs really sophisticated engineering.
And of course, you've got the rolling stock, the iconic Eurostar passenger trains.
The original Class 373s and the newer Class 374 Veleros.
The Le Shuttle for vehicles, those double-deck car shuttles, are the largest railway wagons in the world, by the way.
They're huge, yeah. Quite an experience driving onto one.
And then the freight locomotives, the Class 92s, specifically designed for the tunnel.
Right. It's interesting to note the Night Star project for overnight passenger trains, though. That was actually abandoned.
Yeah, why was that?
A combination of factors, really. Competition from budget airlines making sleeper trains less attractive, changing travel patterns, and the high cost of the specialized rolling stock they'd ordered.
Shame. I always liked the idea of a sleeper train to Paris.
Me too. But the variety of rolling stock still highlights the diverse functions of the tunnel passengers, cars, trucks, general freight.
When you look at the usage and traffic volumes, though, it's a bit of a mixed bag, isn't it?
It is. Initial forecasts were, well, let's say, a bit over-optimistic.
Especially for passenger and freight numbers in the early years.
Yeah, budget airlines definitely had a bigger impact than perhaps anticipated.
But the opening of the high-speed one link on the British side in 2007, that really boosted passenger traffic, didn't it? Cut journey times significantly.
It made a huge difference, yeah. Made the train much more competitive against flying, especially London to Paris or Brussels.
Freight volumes seem to have been a bit more up and down, influenced by things like those tunnel fires we'll touch on and general economic conditions.
That's right. The discrepancy between initial forecasts and actual traffic just underscores the challenges of predicting demand for such a novel piece of infrastructure.
And the impact of external factors like the rise of budget air travel or economic downturns shows the need for adaptability, I guess.
Exactly. Long-term planning needs to account for those uncertainties.
It hasn't all been smooth sailing, though, has it? There have been some pretty significant mechanical incidents.
Unfortunately, yes. Operating such a complex system comes with risks.
We're talking about major fires. I remember the one in 1996 on a freight shuttle.
Yes, and another serious one in 2008, also on a freight shuttle, which caused extensive damage and closed one tunnel for months, and a smaller one in 2015.
And some pretty disruptive train failures, too, especially that snow incident in 2009.
Ah, the snow train chaos.
Yeah, several Eurostars broke down inside the tunnel due to fine, powdery snow getting into the electronics. Thousands were stranded for hours.
Not great PR. It really highlights the complexities of running such an intense operation, 247.
It does. These incidents, while thankfully rare in terms of fatalities, underscore the inherent risks. But they also lead to improvements in safety protocols, rolling stock resilience, and emergency response capabilities. Lessons are learned.
And then there's the persistent issue of illegal immigration. That's been a constant challenge. A very difficult and sensitive issue, yes. For years, migrants have tried to use the tunnel area, particularly around Calais, to get into the UK.
The Sangat camp became a real focal point for a while, didn't it?
It did. And there have been ongoing diplomatic efforts between the UK and France, huge security investments at Coquelles, and, tragically, numerous deaths of people attempting to cross.
It's a stark reminder of the human element and the border control challenges associated with this link. The juxtaposed controls UK border checks happening in France and vice versa are a direct result.
Yes, that's a unique feature born out of necessity to manage that flow and security concerns. It highlights the tunnel's role as a physical border and the complex social and political issues that intersect with big infrastructure projects.
On a lighter note, there have been some rather unusual crossings.
Oh, yeah.
Remember the Kosovo Train for Life back in '99, the humanitarian aid train?
Vaguely, yes.
And then John Surtees, the racing legend, drove an electric car through the service tunnel for charity.
Did he?
Yep. And Chris Froome, the cyclist, actually rode his bike through the service tunnel just before one Tour de France, starting from the UK side.
Wow, cycling under the channel. That's definitely unusual.
It adds a unique dimension, doesn't it? Showcasing its versatility beyond just trains.
For sure. Little footnotes in its history.
And in our increasingly connected world, even the Channel Tunnel has had to keep up technologically.
Mobile signal, you mean?
Exactly. They've now got mobile network coverage, 2G, 3G, and even 4G in both running tunnels.
Oh.
Which is a huge convenience for travelers, let's be honest.
Definitely. No more signal blackouts for the whole journey. Providing mobile connectivity reflects the changing expectations of travelers and the integration of digital tech into even, deep underground infrastructure.
Finally, it's worth noting for you that the tunnel isn't just for trains.
Oh, what else?
It also houses a massive power cable, the Eleclink interconnector.
Yes, linking the UK and French electricity grids.
Exactly. Runs through the service tunnel.
So that adds another layer of strategic importance to the Channel Tunnel, doesn't it? Highlighting its role in energy infrastructure and the interconnectedness of European nations beyond just transport.
Yeah, multi-purpose infrastructure.
Yeah.
So, to wrap things up, what an incredible story, right?
Truly remarkable.
From those early, almost whimsical proposals centuries ago,
The horse-drawn carriages.
to the astonishing feat of modern engineering and its ongoing operation, The Channel Tunnel is, well, it's quite something.
It really is. It's a blend of grand ambition, groundbreaking innovation, and as we've seen, its fair share of persistent challenges, too.
Absolutely. It's a testament to human ingenuity, that deep-seated desire to overcome geographical barriers.
Yeah, and the enduring impact of a seemingly simple idea that faced literally centuries of hurdles before finally becoming a reality, a modern wonder indeed.
Yeah.
And as we've seen, those fundamental questions those early visionaries grappled with, like ventilation, water ingress, ground stability, they continued to drive the incredible engineering solutions we see in the operational tunnel today.
It all connects back.
Mm.
And really makes you think, doesn't it?
Mm.
Given how technology continues to evolve and the ever-shifting geopolitical landscape, what other large-scale infrastructure projects might we see in the future that redefine connections between nations?
That's a big question.
Or perhaps, how can the lessons learned from the Channel Tunnel, both the triumphs and the setbacks, how can they inform these future ambitious undertakings in an increasingly interconnected world? Definitely something for you to really chew on.